Hi, everyone. Before I really get started, I want to tell you a little story. If you don't like what I have to say, blame Julian Pickers. I completely changed what I was going to talk to you about after I had a conversation with Julian in this room yesterday afternoon. Those of you that know me, or those of you that have ever been in Mr. Urace's room, know that I like to pop in there and wax philosophic about history because that's what I taught, and I'm very passionate about history. I care deeply about it, and I think it's been devalued in our society. And if you read the nifty little bio that's in the program about me, I think I had a pretty cool talk to compel you as why studying history is relevant and why it's important to our society as we go forward now more than ever. However, yesterday afternoon I was talking to Julian after this talk and shared with him through the course of our conversation some concerns and thoughts I have about these wonderful little devices that we all have. So I'm going to assume that you've probably already been asked to silence the phone or silence your smartwatch, and I'm going to guess that just about every one of you in this room had to do that. That, to me, is a remarkable turn of events because, as our previous speaker alluded to, the iPhone came out in 2007. Prior to that, a smartphone was a foreign concept, so in a little more than a decade, we've gone from being simply online to being completely connected. The technology is one with us, and we are one with the technology. We are part of the collective. So there you have it. We can't live without these devices. And you may also ask the question then, why would a principal of a high school nationally known for its technological programs, widely pushing technology to its students, giving you computers to take home, is advocating that cell phones be legislated? Because personally, I believe that not a single one of you under the age of 18 needs or should have a cell phone, and furthermore, a smartphone rather. And furthermore, I would suggest that I think if parents provide that, there should be legislative consequences for it under the age of 18. Why is that? My answer is because nothing else has worked. We've tried everything. I'm an educator by trade. What I have seen every day in this building, almost every day in this building for the last several years, in some form or fashion, is a case where this remarkable piece of technology that Steve Jobs delivered to the world has now been flipped on its ear and become a device that, through no faults of its own, can be made for pretty awful purposes. I'm not condemning smartphones. I'm not saying that they're inherently evil. They aren't. Technology can neither be good nor bad. It's what we do with it that gives it its value or lack thereof. And so while there's plenty of research to suggest to you that there are reasons that you should have and use a smartphone and why it's okay for parents to have this and all that that entails, there's also just as much research out there that tells you why these devices are incredibly damaging to your well-being. I would not for a minute say that you can't use a smartphone for entertainment purposes or for educational purposes as long as it's supervised. I personally think that one of the greatest inventions known to man is the PBS Kids app, as I'm sitting at a restaurant patiently waiting for food to come and my daughter's getting awfully aggravated. So I rely on that technology and provide it for educational and entertainment purposes to my 2-year-old. But my 2-year-old's not out there getting on Facebook and mean tweeting someone. I'm sorry, Facebook, you guys aren't there. I meant Facebook, I meant Instagram or Snapchat or Twitter, okay? So it's not that they're bad. It's not that they're not okay if they're used under a supervised circumstance, and it's not that they don't have value. It's that what we have done with them and what society has shown us has occurred over the last several years is incredibly damaging, and I go back to the point that education hasn't worked. If I were standing up here and giving you the cautionary tale that you've all heard already about how GPS tracking and GPS positioning of a phone has actually led to the kidnapping of a girl who simply posted a picture of her school. If I were up here telling you the story of how a picture that someone innocently took to send to a boyfriend or girlfriend has wound up to come back and bite them, you've heard that too. If I extolled to you the virtues of thinking before you hit send, as you have all heard time and time again, I firmly believe that in this moment of all of you sitting there, you get it and you agree with me and you know better. And left to your own devices in that sense, you got it. But at 1:30 in the morning on a Friday night, when you're angry because you've just had a bad breakup, or you think, oh, what's the harm in posting this picture? There's nothing wrong with it. Or you become a keyboard commando because somebody said something really nasty to you, but you didn't have the courage to face them, but you can certainly face them on Twitter or Instagram, and off you go. There are plenty of studies that shows the damage this has done. There is a study that was published by the journal Pediatrics that said between 2007 and 2014, I think that's right, that the rate of teenage depression increased 37%. They attributed that in large part to the preponderance of cyberbullying. Suicide rates are up. Depression is up. We deal every day in this building with kids who are overwhelmed, and there are a lot of reasons for it, and I'm not laying all of this at the feet of a smartphone. But a big part of what we're dealing with and the meanness and anger that's in our society is because teenagers, and I'm not talking down to you because I don't think you're bad people, but the part of your brain that develops that says this is a bad idea, that says danger, Will Robinson, and you actually listen to that message, is not fully developed until you're 24 years old. So it's unfair for us to expect you to be able to make those correct choices all the time and when it matters most. What we essentially are doing is handing you a device that has more computing power than it took to put a man on the moon and saying, here you go, have fun, go play Fortnite. It's like when you turn 16 and you have a freshly minted driver's license, your mom or dad tossing you the keys to a Ferrari and say, have fun, love you, be home by 10. What's the worst that could happen, right? The worst that could happen is depression. The worst that could happen is criminality. The worst that can happen are choices you make now that are completely innocent that come back and bite you when you're 35 years old and applying for a job. That come back and bite you when you're 40 years old and your kids are doing a search of you online. That come back and bite you when you're 25 and the conversation turns to, are there any pictures about you online that I should be concerned about as you're in a relationship and considering getting married? We don't yet know the consequences of these actions because it's so new. And what we do know, historically, is that every new piece of technology or every new substance introduced into our society, once we've begun to understand the consequences of it, have been legislated. There is a reason why you're not allowed to buy alcohol until you're 21. It used to be 18 in some states, and then it was raised to 21. There is a reason why if your parents toss you the keys when you're 14 and say run to the store and pick up some milk, if you get pulled over by the police, your parents are going to go to jail. There's a reason for that. Because there is a learning curve. There's a learning curve that all of us need to understand, and particularly as we learn and we grow and we figure out our place in the world and how to appropriately interact with each other. Legislation is not always the answer, but I found no other way to get a message across. And we have to do something because we know that society is getting angrier. We know that we feel like people are being meaner. We know that we often have problems that stem from this device. One of the most liberating experiences I've had in the recent past was the 36 hours where I mistakenly thought a particular brand of a cell phone case would protect me from the Atlantic Ocean. It did not. Spoiler alert. And for that 36 hours when I was at the beach, I was disconnected from the world, and after the first few hours of me twitching, it felt remarkable. And I was actually upset when my new phone arrived at home in the mail. So where does that leave us? I've talked to you, to some extent about some negative things. I'm talking about legislating a phone and saying you can't have this until you're 18. I'm talking about your parents being charged criminally if they provide you with one. But imagine the flip side of that. God forbid at lunch you actually have to have a conversation. God forbid you actually go back to doing some silly things we did when I was in high school and play paper football across the table or quarter basketball. I don't know if anybody of you here even know what that is than the adults that I'm speaking to. Imagine if you had to read a book at night instead of hop on your phone. Imagine if you had to interact with your parents at dinner instead of everybody being buried in their email or Snapchat or Facebook or what have you. It's not a bad thing. It's an educational thing. We owe it to you as adults to allow you to be kids. We owe it to you as adults to have a childhood where you get a do-over. And you don't get that anymore. As soon as you take a picture and you hit send, it goes to 10,000 of your closest friends and 10 million of their closest friends. And you have no idea when or if that's going to come back and bite you. One of the first things we do when we are hiring individuals is we look at their social media and we ask the question, is there anything out there that is going to be embarrassing to the district? I am afraid that in the not too distant future, that question is going to evolve to what is out there that is potentially embarrassing to the district, or to this employer, to that employer, or to a future spouse, or to a future child. We owe it to you to do something to save us from ourselves, to allow you to have a childhood that is a little bit less stressful, and allow you to grow up in an environment that is safe and protected, just like most of us and your parents did. That is what we owe this generation. And so that is my call to action. That is my case to be made as to why we have to legislate it. Because once we've figured out what can happen with technology or substances that is potentially damaging, we have taken that action. I'm sure that there are those who will argue that what I'm talking about is potentially unconstitutional or that it's simply wrong, and I know that there are powerful lobbies that would rail against it because of how much of this technology is marketed to you and to those younger than you. But there's a way that we can work around it. There's a way that we can work together. And if the argument is communication, then fine, I agree. You need to be able to talk to your parents. Here's a phone where you can call and text. Come pick me up at this time. I'm okay. Having fun. Be home by this time. Whatever the case may be. Technology is not bad. Technology is not inherently bad, and it's not the device's fault that this has occurred. It's not a question of fault. It's a question of evolution. This is just how it's evolved. So what I ask you to consider, what I ask you to think about, what I ask you to talk about is what would really be the harm if you didn't have a smartphone until you turned 18? We could educate you. We being your parents and school and community. We could protect you. We can help you to learn the responsible way to use this device and to use this information, and we can make a safer, happier, less stressful society for all of us and future for all of you. Thank you all very much.